Oregon went 1-1 on Saturday, taking an L at Washington, but winning the commitment of five-star edge Aydin Breland, and they might not be done. We have an update on the timeline for another five-star D lineman, Elijah Rushing. Blair breaking the news in minutes. Plus, the team on the winning end of the field had a few top talents in town, where Washington now stands with a few high-prize prospects after that huge Pac-12 win. Plus, the number one player visiting a top 10 team this weekend, where things stand with UNC and 2025's David Sanders. All that and more as the College Football Recruiting Show starts right now. Alongside Blair and Gulo, I am Emily Proud. A reminder to submit your questions in the chat. The only way that happens is by subscribing to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Also, one more request. Hit that like button so we know that you're watching. Blair, some unfortunate injury news to start the show. Georgia standout tight end and Heisman Trophy contender Brock Bowers underwent tightrope surgery to repair a high ankle sprain today. This is per the university. He is expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks, but a full recovery is anticipated here. Blair, my question to you is, we talk all about how great Georgia has recruited the tight end position. So now the next man up looks to be sophomore Oscar Delp. What can we expect while Bowers recovers?
The number one tight end in that 2022 class, I think, is ready to show that he can be the guy in the spotlight and can take the reins of that position. A really athletic pass catcher, a player that can get open over the seam and beat defenses over the top. They also have Lawson Lucky, who's a true freshman, the number 2 tight end in the 2023 class, another player that could really contribute to that offense. And that's the importance of recruiting at a high level. Georgia's going to be able to stack up number 1 and number 2 rated players at each position, and this is why they might not be able to skip a beat even by losing a player like Brock Bowers.
This is why recruiting is so important, and this is why you should watch the College Football Recruiting Show. We warned you ahead of time. This tight end group is very, very deep. Of course, Brock Bowers is one of one. It'll be a tough task for them to replicate his production, but they've got options. Speaking of options, we got a lot of options to talk about on this show because there are so many highlights that happen in the world of recruiting. But we start with this. There are stunning results in the game of football, every week. But Blair, what happened Friday night in the state of California is the ultimate head scratcher. Number 9, St. John Bosco, as our friends at Max Preps put it, humbled number 1 Mater Dei, shutting them out 28-0. How did Bosco pull this off?
I surely was not expecting it. I've seen both teams on the field on Friday nights, and I thought Mater Dei would cruise to victory, but they did it with defense. Elijah Brown, the Stanford-bound quarterback, was shut down for the first time ever, and Bosco has a lot of weapons on defense, so they were able to shut down that explosive Mater Dei offense.
I see a lot of great plays in that highlight package. We've got more plays later on in the show, but let's move on to the number 1 prospect in the class of 2025 who visited North Carolina this weekend. That's offensive tackle David Sanders. He's fresh off a visit to Georgia, watching the Tar Heels taking down Miami to remain unbeaten on the season. Blair, for those that are maybe tunnel visioned on this current class, what kind of talent is the top player in next year's cycle?
A franchise left tackle, the first player to earn 5 stars in that 2025 class. He's the type of player that coaches build offenses around. A very bright future and plenty of suitors.
We've got more on his visit and UNC's recruiting momentum a little bit later on in the show. Meanwhile, the top-ranked quarterback in the 2025 class visited LSU over the weekend. Bryce Underwood, taken in the sights and sounds of a victory in Death Valley. He is set to commit in January, so we still have some time. But where do you think the Tigers stand in this ongoing recruitment?
It sounds like LSU's in a really good spot there, and kudos to the videographer who was at the stadium and showed the family having a great time inside Tiger Stadium. Jaden Daniels also put on a show, 325 passing yards. I think that was by design.
I mean, he's already repping the Tigers. It'd be a very easy transition for him. How about another five-star? This from the 2024 class, defensive lineman Aydin Breland officially committing to Oregon on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel Saturday afternoon. I mean, what a victory for the Ducks, and they may not be finished. Yep. So let's talk more about it with our West Coast guru, Brandon Huffman, joining the show. Brandon, I don't know if you have awesome shoes like my man Breeland had on that table, but I want to ask you about Oregon taking, its first Pac-12 loss of the season at the hands of Washington. But earlier in the day, we saw that exciting win for Dan Lanning and company, beating out the likes of Georgia and Miami for the top-ranked player in California. So what can you tell us about how it all came to be?
Well, it was quite a rally, and not unlike a year ago on signing day when Mateo Uiagalelei committed to Oregon down the stretch when it looked like he was going to be maybe staying in Southern California or heading out of the state. With Aydin Breland, all the buzz had been for Georgia in the months and weeks leading up to his decision. But on Saturday, it turned out that Oregon was who got his decision. Now, it was going to potentially start a big day for the Ducks. Unfortunately, a couple hours after his commitment, they lost on the field to Washington. But off the field, getting the commitment from Breland is huge because they could end up putting together a very, very good defensive line class with the decommitment of Elijah Rushing recently. The crystal ball's pointing to the Ducks there. Jericho Johnson, the Ducks are trending with him, although we'll talk about him later. He was in Seattle this weekend. But getting Aydin Breland, the #1 player in the state of California in the 2024 class, is huge. Because in a conference that, with the move to the Big Ten, with Oregon headed to a new conference that's big in the trenches with some of the best offensive lines in the country, they need guys inside of that defense that can help them make that transition. Aydin Breland is that kind of guy.
Yeah, Huff,
and this is why Dan Lanning was brought over to Eugene to take over from Mario Cristobal. This is a coach who's been in some of these heavyweight battles from a recruiting standpoint. You mentioned him beating out the likes of Georgia, and that's a competition level that he strives to be in. That's where he wants Oregon to be competing on the recruiting trail. And then you think about how he's doing it, right? He went out to the state of California a number of times in the previous cycle, and now he gets the #1 player in the state again here in the 2023 or in the 2024 class. And he's done this by bringing in experienced staff members that have roots out west. He didn't have any when he came over as a defensive coordinator at Georgia, but you mentioned Tosh Lupoy and Tony Tuioti and Demetris Martin and all these coaches that have been able to recruit the Golden State consistently over the last decade. I think you have to give them a tip of the cap as well.
Yeah, Huff, you bring up.
And I think,
Go ahead.
Just more importantly, there was once a time where Mater Dei kids just by natural resolve would go to USC. In the last few years, that has not been the case. There's been a number of players that have opted to head elsewhere, and Oregon has been the recipient of so many of these former Monarch players. But Blair, like you said, with Tosh Lupoy being at the University of Oregon, given his time down south, he knows how to recruit down the south. He knows how to recruit against SEC schools. Dan Lanning obviously has that same experience as well. But Lupoy has the relationships out west, and now Oregon's sitting pretty with the commitment of Aydin Breland in their defensive line recruiting for the 2024 class.
And Huff, you brought up a great point in that every time we see, a five-star commit, we always try to look at the fallout. Who's next? Who's next? Already kind of laying the tea leaves for that, Blair, when you put in a crystal ball for newly available five-star Elijah Rushing to also potentially end up in Eugene, putting together what's going to be an insane defensive line class if all these guys click. But Blair, you've got an update. What's the latest with Rushing?
Everything we keep hearing, Emily, is that this might not drag out very long. I keep hearing that this decision could happen in the next couple weeks, and what a huge win that would be for Oregon if they were able to wrap this up while the season's still going on and they can continue to focus on reeling in other top targets. I had heard when he decommitted that he was open to other schools, and that's still the case. I think he's still going to listen to programs from across the country. Remember, he took official visits to Tennessee. He went out to UCLA. Washington has been trying to get in the mix. He's a Florida legacy. I know the Gators have been in contact with Elijah Rushing as well. Notre Dame was another school that he took an official to. So I'm not saying he's closed the windows or closed some doors to other programs, but if this really wraps up here in the next couple weeks, as it sounds like it could, then all signs could be pointing towards the Ducks.
Huff, I saw your
And I
eyes
think
get really big. What do you think about that?
Well, and here's the craziest part. They just landed the number one player in the state of California. They have potentially a chance to land the number one player in the state of Arizona, by the way, a state that they've recruited well in the last few years. But then there's also the number one player in Northern California, Jericho Johnson, who's now the highest rated uncommitted player in the state of California. He's still available. And again, we've talked about this. When you look at what Mario Cristobal did when he was at Oregon, he really recruited the offensive line well. Getting guys like Penei Sewell was huge for the Oregon football program on the offensive line. But Dan Lanning has gone the opposite way. And you look at what has built those national title teams at the University of Georgia, it's been their front seven. It's especially been on their front four. So if Oregon can come in with a class in 2024 that already has Aydin Breland, could potentially land Elijah Rushing and Jericho Johnson, again, that's the kind of transition you need to make. But now you got to get it done on Saturdays. You can't go 0-3 against your rivals in the first year and a half that you've been there. You've got to start winning those games, because before you got to start talking about national championships, you got to start winning those regional championships. And right now, there's a lot of people in Eugene that are not happy with the way the game turned out on Saturday. Winning recruiting battles is big, but you've got to win those games on Saturday, especially against your key rivals, like Oregon has failed to do since Dan Lanning got to Eugene.
Husky fans are probably seething right now because we haven't even talked about the Washington Huskies, and they won the football game on Saturday. It was beautiful there. It looked electric. The atmosphere was obviously something that we expected out of that stadium. You saw the yachts, you saw the boats, you saw the lake, and it was a really, I think, exciting, humongous victory for the Washington Huskies. Who were some names, Huff, that you're keeping tabs on that Washington fans should know were inside that stadium on Saturday?
First, let's make it very clear. The last 30 seconds of what I said, Husky fans were not seething. They were getting excited because they knew they were on the delivering end of those two losses for Dan Lanning. And one of the biggest losses in his career there was the one on Saturday, because there was a chance for the Huskies to lose that game at home, Oregon to win and capture that momentum. Instead, Washington wins with an electric crowd, an electric atmosphere, and more importantly, they wowed two of the best players that have yet to make a commitment of any sort. Now, Elijah Rushing right now is the top uncommitted prospect out west because he decommitted, but Jericho Johnson has not committed anywhere yet. He's the number one player in Northern California. He's got a Final Four of Oregon, Washington, USC, and Utah. He's visited Oregon for a game against Colorado. He already took his official visit to Washington, but it was important for the Huskies to get him up for a game and then for them to beat their rival, a team that they're going toe-to-toe for. That was huge for them. So getting in front of Jericho Johnson, who still has official visits to USC and Utah to take this fall, that was big for them. But then there's also the Jason Brown factor, another player where Washington and Oregon are involved. They're in the top three for the number one player in the state of Washington that is yet to make a commitment of his own, the top running back in the Northwest. He's down to Oregon, Michigan State, and Washington, but Michigan State was a top three team prior to the departure of Mel Tucker. It's down to the Ducks and the Huskies. There's a crystal ball for the Ducks right now, but with Saturday's performance, that could be something that if the Huskies decide to push for Jason Brown, and who's having a magnificent senior season, could they once again down the stretch, like they did with Caleb Presley a year ago, a Seattle kid who was committed to Oregon, who ultimately flipped to the Huskies, can they do it again with Jason Brown? Those two 24s are the key recruitments left, but there was a host of 2025 recruits like Marco Jones, Kellen Ford, guys that have been to the Northwest, guys that have ties to the Northwest or are being heavily recruited by both teams. Both those players were in attendance, plus a number of Southern California prospects. Washington could not have had a better day work out for them in front of recruits and in front of the college football media and fans than what happened on Saturday afternoon at Husky Stadium.
Huff, you knew all those recruits were coming to town, so you skipped on out of there. You headed south to Corvallis to check out Oregon State versus UCLA also on Saturday, and there were a number of high-profile recruits that made it down to see that game inside Reser Stadium. What did you take away from that, and who were some of the names that you saw down there?
Well, it was a great weekend for Oregon State. I was on the field before the game, and I could not get a cell signal on the field, so I had no idea what was going on in Husky Stadium for the last 2 minutes of the game. And then I reacted to the student section's reaction, and they're cheering when Oregon missed that field goal. And it caught the attention of all the recruits that were there because they all kind of looked around, but they watched a great performance by the Beaver team. They're coming off that loss 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago to Oregon, to Washington State on the road. Since then, they've beaten Utah and UCLA in back-to-back weeks. They had that game against Utah on a Friday night, so they didn't get a lot of recruits there. But on Saturday, they had Darius Afalava. Blair, I know a guy you're really high on, the number 2 player in the composite in the state of Utah for 2025. They had Ryland Jesse, a quarterback that they were trying to get a commitment from back in the spring, who ultimately committed to Utah State, but the Beavers have not stopped recruiting him. He was up in Corvallis this weekend for an unofficial visit. Oregon State is trying to flip his commitment, get him from Utah State to Oregon State, and that was a big visitor there. They also had some other key in-state commits, guys like Dexter Foster, who I got a chance to see Thursday night. Oregon State was his only Power 5 offer. He committed after watching him play on Thursday. I think the Beavers are getting an absolute steal. And if you look at what Jonathan Smith has done at his alma mater, it's those lightly recruited guys that play at really good high school programs, but for whatever reason, just aren't getting recruited. Factoring in a guy like a DJ who's coming to life in Corvallis, and you put what DJ Uiagalelei did on Saturday night in Corvallis in front of all of those recruits, and there's a reason why Oregon State is so excited about the direction that Jonathan Smith's taken them, even with all the uncertainty about their conference affiliation. And a lot of recruits got to see a great performance by the Beavers against UCLA on Saturday evening.
I don't know about you guys, but I think we came around from starting with Oregon in this segment to then hitting on the Huskies and Oregon State. So that, if anything, should earn your like if you have not already hit that like button. And we don't just hit on the highlights on this show. We talk all recruiting. So how about maybe some controversy brewing in the Mountain West? Boise State, with a fourth quarter collapse at Colorado State. Now Andy Avalos, the hot seat conversation around him just keeps getting hotter, which then we're following the dominoes. It leads to speculation about the commitment of four-star wide receiver Gatlin Bair, who was the highest ranked commit in Bronco history. So Huff, what can you tell us about this developing situation?
Well, I can tell you that there are a lot of schools that had Gatlin Bair on their final list that are very closely paying attention to what is transpiring in Boise. When Andy Avalos was hired 3 years ago, post-COVID, to replace Brian Harsin, I think everybody thought it was going to work out successfully, but this year has been a struggle, starting with that opening game loss to Washington. They've had two games where they've blown 17-point leads, and then losing on Saturday like they did was not good for the Broncos. And what that means is that schools are still kicking around with Gatlin Bair. He was already going to be a unique recruitment anyway because of his plans to serve as LDS mission. So even if he signs in the 2024 class, there was going to be those 2 years that he was on the mission field where schools were going to still have a chance to recruit him when he came back. There was speculation even then, hey, would he even want to come back to Boise State? You know, Andy Avalos may be at a Power 5 school by then. But at the rate things have been going in Boise, there's no guarantee Avalos is going to survive this year. So I guarantee you that, you know, it's been well speculated and much discussed in the last couple of weeks. There are still schools kicking the tires with Bair, most notably Michigan, who was the runner-up for him. They're still trying to get back involved with Bair, even though he committed to the Broncos. And with all the uncertainty going on in Boise, meanwhile, Michigan is a top 2 team right now. Things are going swimmingly in Ann Arbor. The Wolverines are re-entering the chat and trying to get his commitment. But again, whoever ends up getting him, they won't see him on campus till 2026, and a lot can go on in these next couple of years, but a lot could go on in these next couple of weeks in Boise.
You say kick the tires, I say the sharks are swarming. Everybody wants a piece of Gatlin Bair. Thank you so much, Huff. You are the best of the West, as we like to say. You can catch more of his work on 247sports.com. And as always, I highly recommend, if you want that exclusive information, become a VIP member today. Well, the ACC race continues to heat up as North Carolina stays perfect with a 41-31 win over Miami. And don't look now, the Tar Heels are a top 10 team in the nation. And you better believe that on-field momentum is translating to the trail, which is why we're bringing in our next guest to talk all about the fun in Tar Heel Nation. It's Inside Carolina's Don Callahan joining the show now. Don, a pretty big Saturday for UNC. And speaking of big, the number 1 player in the 2025 class, David Sanders, was in town, all 6'6", 270 of him. And everyone is rightly going after the offensive tackle out of Charlotte. But what's the pitch, as you understand it, from Mac Brown and his staff?
Well, if you look at the other schools that are involved here, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, I mean, these are all schools that are playing for the playoff or playing the playoff every year. North Carolina obviously isn't in that tier yet. So what Mac Brown has to do is pitch the idea of what North Carolina can be. And going undefeated, beating Miami in front of David Sanders is a step in that direction. Not only that, Mac Brown is preaching the fact that he's going to do it with in-state players. And it makes it really easy when your best player, the face of your program, is Drake May, a fellow Charlotte product, just like David Sanders.
Don, three-star defensive lineman Leroy Jackson is the last remaining player on that 2024 board. He just took his official visit to campus this past weekend. How does he feel about potentially joining that program?
Well, he was kind of quiet after the visit. He spoke very highly of the visit, but I think he doesn't want to give away too much. But if you look at just the field here and just the job North Carolina has done kind of swooping in, things look very good for UNC. You know, he spoke very highly of the visit, but more importantly, he was very, very specific with certain things. He didn't just say he liked the academics. He talked specifically about the major that he wants to pursue at North Carolina. He spoke about the relationships he's already established in such a short period of time. So UNC sits in a really good spot. He's going to announce on November 3rd, so we'll see then for sure. But you got to put the North Carolina as a favorite at this point.
Let's go back to the 2025 class. That's where three-star safety CJ Jim Coley was in Chapel Hill over the weekend. What did he think of that fun atmosphere Saturday night?
Well, CJ, he's one of those happy-go-lucky guys, so he seems like everything's really happy with him. But he was very specific also with just his responses. You know, he said that he has a top 3 and North Carolina is in it, which really, for a kid in Tennessee, who's also being pursued by the Volunteers in Oklahoma, who make up the rest of his top 3. I mean, that's all you can ask for North Carolina, is to be at that point at this stage and just kind of survive in advance with his recruitment, try to get him back on campus, which is something that he said he intends on doing. But, you know, at this stage of his recruitment, UNC can't really ask for more from CJ.
4-star offensive tackle Alex Payne was also inside the stadium for a visit, and competition is going to be very, very fierce for him. But what's the pulse on UNC and Alex Payne?
So this one is really interesting because UNC actually offered him very early in the summer, right before he kind of blew up. So he spoke very highly of that experience back in June, and so it was really good to see him come back so that he didn't forget about North Carolina. And then also seeing the game day atmosphere, I think, and seeing that specific game day atmosphere with what the fans look like was a great experience. He spoke very highly of that. He's a guy who's still kind of putting his recruitment in order, but you got to think North Carolina is definitely going to be in the mix until the very end with him also.
Let's talk big picture, Don. The Tar Heels are off to their best start since 1997. They're 6-0. They're ranked in the AP top 10. So how much has maybe all of that positive momentum on the field, where have you seen that pay dividends on the recruiting trail?
So I think we're just kind of starting to see some of the benefits now. You know, I think a lot of recruits and fans too were a little hesitant to get too excited about what North Carolina was doing early on in the season, just because of how last season kind of ended. It started very strong and ended not so great. You know, a game like the Miami game where UNC won, I don't know if the UNC wins that last year, if you understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And so to see UNC kind of get over the hump, recruits definitely are taking notice. You know, they obviously, the recruits who were there Saturday night saw the fan base, saw what the potential can be with that fan base, how devoted they are, the atmosphere of the stadium. So I think really in the coming weeks, we're going to see a lot more buzz with North Carolina and its recruiting, particularly with those who were visiting this past weekend.
All right, Don, thank you so much. I promise this was unintentional, but I did wear my Carolina blue today to support the segment. So thank you for being here, and you can check out more of Don's great work at InsideCarolina.com. Also, our man, Steve Wiltfong, spoke with David Sanders' mom after his visit. He's got some great feedback from her. We know how important the feedback from mom is, so you can read that online at InsideCarolina.com.
You know it. Been on top for so long. Yeah, you know it. Been on top for so long.
It is one of our favorite things to do on a Monday. It is time to hit on our top plays from Friday night high school football action. Kicking it off with number 5 in Olney, Maryland for a heated rivalry between DeMatha and Good Counsel. In overtime, DeMatha looking to the red zone for the win, but oh no, it's picked. Judah Jenkins, the Indiana commit, coming down with it to seal the victory.
The interception was really nice, but how about Fahim Delane putting the pressure on the quarterback and forcing that mistake? Fahim is a top 30 prospect nationally in the 2025 class.
It's a team game. Everyone contributes. Falcons topping the Stags 35-28 in overtime. Let's go to number 4. And what's happening here? This is an offensive tackle. Alex Keith has the ball. He's throwing it and hits a man downfield. A 39-yard pass. Blair, we've heard of big man touchdown, but this is totally different.
Look at that form, smooth delivery. Someone get Andrew Ivins on the line. We might have a candidate for the freaks list.
I mean, with a toss like that, so impressive. A lefty, too. It was a game winner. Garden City tops Robichaud 19-12. What a touchdown. Let's go to our number 3 play. That's Giovanni Dijon lining up to kick a 27-yarder for the win, and he gets it. So it hits off the left upright and falls through, but then you talk about going through. I mean, look at all of the fans that just storm the field. It's a walk-off as they top rival CH Flowers.
The bank is open after hours on Fridays. I love the fans already on the field, and the officials haven't even signaled that the kick is good. I love the faith that they showed in their kicker.
I mean, they believe in my man. A 27-yarder dinks it in. Let's go to number 2. St. Thomas Aquinas facing Fort Lauderdale. That's Aquinas running back and Ohio State commit Jordan Lyle just refusing to go down. He sheds basically an entire defense worth of tacklers. Blair, that would make a guy in my backyard, Derrick Henry, very proud.
Yes, I counted 11 would-be tacklers, so that is an entire defense. And look at 55 here. He saw what just happened. He'd rather go after the blocker than go after our guy Jordan Lyle there. He wants no part of that poster.
That's why we're comparing it to King Henry. You don't want to have to take this man down. All right, Aquinas wins it 42-zip, but our number 1 play comes from Ohio, Aurora and Barberton. The ball is up. It is caught by Dylan Crass. You're probably wondering, where did the football go? He actually picks this ball while flipping through the air. Blair, we got to see this in slow-mo.
Yeah, the backflip, somersault. You like multi-sport athletes. He's a gymnast probably with that kind of flexibility and the hand-eye coordination. We talked about Cookie Monster last week. This one is on the top shelf as well.
A lot of additions to the freaks list. We don't want to tell Andrew Ivins how to do his job, but man, there's a lot of guys on this list. If you have a top play you think is worthy of being on our top plays, you can submit it using the hashtag 247 top plays on X and Facebook.
This guy is a blur on tape. He zigs and zags.
He's a player to potentially make an impact from day one.
It's time now for our recruit of the weekend, and it is North Carolina State commit Jonathan Paylor, the top 247 running back out of Burlington, North Carolina, went off Friday night for Hugh M. Cummings High. 414 total yards, 5 touchdowns, did all of that work on just 19 touches against Northwood. Blair, what has gotten into this young man?
I have to double check my math, but that's over 20 yards per touch. This is a player who was really wanted during the recruiting process before he came off the board to NC State. Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina had all gotten official visits. Alabama had offered him as well. Really electric playmaker with elite speed. He won the North Carolina 2A state track championship in the 100 and the 200 meters as a sophomore a couple years ago. So a lot to like there, and the Wolfpack are getting a dynamic playmaker at running back.
Big win for NC State, but we talked about the sharks in the waters with Gatlin Bear. I have to imagine there's some other North Carolina schools, maybe some we talked about on the show today, that will continue to swarm for his services. Man, what a Friday night for that young man. Jonathan Paylor, congratulations. All right, we've got some viewer questions we want to hit on. Rob wants to know, with Colorado losing 3 out of their last 4, has the hype train slowed down for Coach Prime? What do you think?
From a recruiting sense, I don't think so, because I think recruits are still going to be paying attention to what Coach Prime has done in Boulder, and I think they want to be a part of what he's building. Look, this was going to be a rebuild. This was a long process, but now that he's getting some pieces in order and he's bringing his Louis luggage, as he likes to say, I think recruits are paying attention and they're saying, hey, I could be a part of that turnaround. I could be a part of what Coach Prime wants to build. He's already set a really good foundation. He's built the buzz. He's got a really explosive and attractive offense. So if you're an offensive recruit looking at the Buffaloes, you look at that and you look at it as an opportunity to really make an impact and make a name for yourself and continue to build your brand. So I think he's already done enough. He hasn't been winning football games, but I think he's already caught everyone's attention. And I think we're all excited to see what he might be able to do in 2024 as he continues to bring in his type of players.
Yeah, he's continuing to build this roster. You saw all the work he did in the transfer portal. Have yet to see him bring in his guys through the high school ranks, and certainly, yeah, the momentum is not slowed down. It's hard, Blair, not to recalibrate expectations, but they've already doubled their projected win total so far this year, so I already constitute it as a win for the Buffs. Derek wants to know, he's a USC fan, and he wants to know if the Trojans have recruited well enough in the trenches in preparation of their move to the Big Ten.
It doesn't seem like it right now, Emily, and I think the issue is that they've been missing far too many times on elite defensive linemen within the West Coast. We heard Huff talk about Mateo Uiagalelei, the #1 edge rusher in the state of California last cycle. He goes up to Oregon. Aydin Breland in this 2024 class is also headed up to Oregon, and they've been doing most of their work in the transfer portal. Bear Alexander was a big pickup for them in the offseason. Anthony Lucas, a former 5-star who played his freshman season at Texas A&M, was another marquee victory for them. It's not in the trenches, but they went out to Oklahoma State to get Mason Cobb out of the transfer portal as well. So that's how they've been rebuilding that program. I think they need to ramp things up on the high school front to be able to continue to ascend, not only in the trenches, but as a program as a whole, and to continue to build that defense, because things are only going to get more difficult in the Big Ten. Notre Dame really bullied them on Saturday, and that's the type of physicality they're going to deal with next season.
Yeah, it's hard when you compare them to the other Pac-12 schools that are moving on, considering what Oregon has been doing on the defensive line. But yeah, you're not just comparing yourself with those guys. It's all the other literal big guys in the Big Ten. It's definitely a huge difference. All right, Darian wants to know, I see generational talent, he put it in quotes, being thrown around now in regards to Jeremiah Smith. Is he really on the same level as guys like Julio Jones and Randy Moss? That's a toughie.
I think so. And our guy, Andrew Ivins, has been all over this one and loves his explosiveness on the edge, but also his versatility to be able to do things in the slot, in the red zone. He can beat defenses in a number of ways, over the top, underneath. He's got the yards after catch trait as well. And this is a player, I think, that's going to be able to make an impact right away. There's a reason why everyone's been trying to pull him away from Ohio State. We're going to hear his name quite a bit on Saturdays for the years to come.
Certainly is a generational talent. If you're curious to learn more about him, you can go back to our show from Thursday. But Blair, real quick, before we want to go, I want to say what happened Friday. It was the 1-year anniversary of this show. I know it started as Recruiting 24/7, then evolved into the College Football Recruiting Show, but it's been you and I from the very beginning. It's been a fun ride. Here's to many years to come. Thanks for watching all of those episodes. For Blair and Gulo, I'm Emily Proud, and this is the College Football Recruiting Show.